Hello everyone, welcome back to this video series on clinical SAS SDTM programming. In this video, we will take a look at the variables in SDTM CM domain. So CM is nothing but concomitant medications, and as part of the SDTM standard classification, CM domain falls under interventions class. So let us assume that there is a clinical trial ongoing in which the subject has visited the investigator's office at a particular visit. On that particular visit, the investigator has asked the subject whether the patient has taken any medication since last visit. So let's assume that the subject has responded that I have taken paracetamol. So when the subject said that he or she has taken the paracetamol, so the investigator would have some follow-up questions like what was the start date of that medication, and stop date of that medication, what was the dosage, and what was the dosage form, whether it is in the form of tablet, capsule, injection, or infusion, etc. And the route of administration, whether it has been taken orally or has been injected, so etc. And then the investigator would also be interested in understanding why this particular medication was taken. So let us now try to identify the variables that would be used to capture the information in as part of SDTM CM domain. So the variable, every clinical trial would be having an identifier, and that identifier for study would be stored in a variable called study ID. And then the subject, every subject in a clinical trial would have an identifier, and that information would be stored in a variable called U subj ID, unique subject identifier. And then this question, did you take any medication since last visit, will not be captured because only the medications taken would be captured in concomitant medications in a regular case. So this text, the paracetamol, would be captured in a variable called CMTRT. So we know that in SDTM domain, the name of the SDTM, the abbreviation for the SDTM domain would be used as prefix for most of the variables in that particular domain. So most of the variables in CM domain would begin with CM here. So this information would be paracetamol, the text of paracetamol would be stored in the variable CMTR. And then start date. We know that the prefix for start is ST and then date time character. So as this is concomitant medication start date, the entire variable would be CM, ST, DTC. Similarly, the stop date or end date would be stored in a variable called CM, EN, DTC. And then this dosage, say for example, what was the dosage taken when the investigator asked this, and the subject might say that it's 500 mg or 650 mg. The number 500 or 650 would be stored in a variable called CM dose, and the unit mg will be stored in a variable called CM dose U, and the dosage form will be stored in a variable called CM DOS FRM, and the route of administration would be stored in a variable called CM route, and why that particular medication was taken would be stored in a variable called indication, CMINDC. So the medication was taken for, say for example, this paracetamol was taken for high fever. So that indication would be stored in the variable called CMINDC. Now let us try to identify some derived variables that can be or that will be created based on the collected variables. So we know that for every date, so a relative day will be derived in SDTM domains, and for CMSTDTC, that uh, relative day or the study day variable will be CMSTDY. The entire prefix would be same, only DTC would be replaced with DY. Similarly, for CMENDTC, the study day variable would be CMENDY. And in every SDTM domain, so we will create an epoch variable. So in interventions domains, we derive the epoch variable based on start date. So when we have the start date, we also know that epoch can be derived. So now we have identified some core variables in SDTM CM domain. Now let us try to identify how many number of variables we can recollect with this flow. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, so 13. So we'll be able to easily recollect 13 core SDTM CM variables with this flow. So there will be a second kind of scenario when collecting concomitant medication. So let us now go there and see. Sometimes at the start of the study, so the investigators would be interested in understanding whether the patient has taken any specific medication. So for this sake of simplicity, I have asked the same question. So did you take paracetamol in last 7 days? So let's assume that this question is being asked at the screening. So we would be capturing whether they have taken paracetamol or not as part of SDTM CM domain. So with this kind of pre-specified medication, so we'll have additional set of variables. So this paracetamol will still be stored in a variable called CMTRT. And as this paracetamol on this particular case is a pre-specified medication. So to indicate that this question is related to a pre-specified medication, we create a variable called CMPRESP. PRESP stands for pre-specified. And we populate it with a value of y on the rows which correspond to this question. And then whether the medication has been taken or not, yes, no, would be stored in a variable called CM occur. So pre-specified whether the paracetamol is being taken or not would be stored in a variable called CM occur with a value of y or n. So let's say the investigator has not asked the question for a particular subject. In such cases, they would have to mark this as not done. So this information of whether that particular question being not asked is stored in a variable called CM stat. And they would have to provide the reason why that question was not asked, and that information would be stored in a variable called CM reas and so reason not done why a particular question is not being asked. So let us now try to identify how many new variables we have identified. CMTRT we have already seen in the previous case. So CM presp is 1, CM occur is 2, CM start is 3, and CM reas and D is 4. So we have identified 13 variables here and 4 variables, additional variables with this kind of second kind of scenario. In this case, so we have totally identified or will be able to recollect 17 variables if we try to remember this flow. So thank you for watching and keep learning.